The Communist Party of China is holding a dialogue with world political parties in Beijing from Thursday until Sunday along the theme of building a community of a shared future for mankind. More than 200 leaders of foreign parties and political organizations from over 120 countries and regions are attending the meetings. General Secretary of the CPC, Xi Jinping, will deliver a keynote speech on Friday. Some analysts are saying that after its 19th National Congress, the CPC will share its perspectives on global governance with international counterparts during this round of dialogue. So what do foreign delegates expect to take away from these meetings? I'm pleased to be joined in the studio by Yunus, member of the Central Committee and Deputy Chairman of International Relations in the Vatan Partisi of Turkey. He is here in Beijing attending the dialogues. And by Lawrence Bram, Founding Director of the Himalayan Consensus Institutes. Gentlemen, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Lawrence, yes, let me come to you first. This is not the first time that the CPC is dialoguing with the world. We know there has been CPC's dialogue with the world for a couple of times, and this is the first time that there's a dialogue between CPC and world's political parties. What's the difference and why it is attracting so many people?
Well, from the 19th Party Congress, which was held just last month, China is now in a new era, and I think that's represented for the party as well. I think it's a very clever move by President Xi, because one of the reasons for a lot of apprehension in the South China Sea, a lot of the stress points before are because of the historical role of the Communist Party. Back in Mao's time, in the 1960s, the party insisted on party-to-party relations with other communist parties, which often was not in parallel with the state-to-state relations. So this led to a lot of conflicts, a lot of problems and misinterpretations in Southeast Asia, in particular. And now by saying, look, the Communist Party of China deals with all political parties, regardless of whether they're socialist, Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. And moreover, the signal being, we deal with, as a government, the government in power. We're not there to try and dislodge that government. We're not going to intervene, as has been, the policy of the United States before. If they don't like a particular government, they call it a regime, and then they'll either try to disrupt it internally, or they'll just simply have regime change. The view is it doesn't matter. It could be, again, Democrat, Republican, it could be, Muslim Brotherhood, we don't care. We deal with the party that's been selected by the people through their own political process. I think this is a very different set of messages than the historical ones, which have become a kind of historical baggage for the CPC coming back to the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. Mr. Soner, being a delegate to the party, what is your take on what Lawrence just talked about, coming as one of the opposition parties in Turkey, right, and not being a communist party, but rather a united front party? What is your feelings coming to this dialogue?
Well, I will pick up a sentence that Mr. Brand used, that Lawrence used. Not only China is in a new era, the whole world is in a new era. The whole world is at the brink of a new era, where what we have known as the Atlantic system or the Atlantic coalition is crumbling, is crashing down. And what we have instead, because there is the law of energy. If one energy goes down, then another energy has to rise up. So who's rising up instead? It's Asia or Eurasia. So this is the context in which we see the call for this dialogue, for this meeting, and this is why we are very, very excited. And we think that this will be the rise of a new civilization, actually. We don't expect just a change of roles, okay? It's not the United States, it's now China instead. No, we think that Asia will lead Eurasia, well, Asia leading and Europe following, will lead to the rise of a new civilization. And this is indicated in our view in the slogan of the Congress as well.
Yeah, very, very interesting. But what will you be expecting to hear, to learn about during these dialogues? What will we be looking out for?
Well, we will be looking out exactly how the Communist Party of China thinks about this exactly. The right. Are we going to build up a new civilization? There is a lot of indications for that. The initiative of One Belt, One Road is not just a matter of economic cooperation or an infrastructure thing or just building trains. It is the backbone, if you will, of this leading new continent, Eurasia. It's a strategic cooperation. And it's a cooperation built on sharing. Watch out, it's not mutual interest. When they used, when we had the Americans talking about world order, they talked about mutual interest. That is, two different negotiating parts with their own interest, and then they have the conflict about their interest. No, it's here, it's shared. Sharing is a collective position. It is not the individualistic position that we know from the West. It is not the classical liberalism that we know from there. It is the Asian tradition of society leading.
Very interesting. So, Lawrence, do you think General Secretary Xi Jinping of the CPC will be able to lay out the vision China has for this new era that Sonia was talking about?
I just want to pick up on what you just said, because I agree completely. I mean, this is really, the Silk Road is back, and coming from your country, Turkey, right to China, the Silk Road, this is a new Silk Road. It's not just about infrastructure, it's also about financial architecture, and it's also about an enormous amount of cultural interaction and exchange. And with that, we really have, you know, and what you just said, you know, energy, when you have, you know, the collapse, the chaos theory, when things start to collapse, they completely collapse. And when things rise, they rise. And we really see now a change in the history, you know, for over 2,000 years, the Silk Road was the main economic order of the planet. It was a brief period of 200 to 300 years of colonialism and post-colonialism that broke that, and now it's back. But I think with this, you have two different political approaches. Before, you had, driven from the Atlantic Association, Atlantic Treaty side, North America, you had the view that there was a sort of monolithic globalization of Americanization that would be pushed across the planet. And here, I think what President Xi's convening is a view of very diversified localization, with a lot of respect not only for different countries and cultures, but saying, look, each country will have its own political process. It may have one party, it may have many parties, and we're going to respect that process. We're going to keep in touch with everybody, and again, whoever comes to power, China will deal with that government. It's not going to have party-to-party relations that are subversive, as may have been the case in the 60s and 70s when we were talking about a communist international and a global communist revolution, where communist parties were allied often against the government. Yeah. That's done and gone with. That's the past. And I think that's why this is really a new era.
Yeah. President Xi has been talking about this idea of a community of shared future for mankind. I mean, okay, it's quite a peculiar term, and not everybody would immediately understand it. Sonia, coming from where you come from, what do you think of this term? Do you think it really says something that is important for the direction where we are going?
I think it does, and if I may speak from the perspective of Turkey, we do expect not only China but all the Asian countries to take a more leading role globally, leading role. We Asians need to feel that responsibility. We are the continent here that has to lead the mankind out of the crisis in which it has been thrown into by the Atlantic system, by the neoliberal system, and the economic crisis and the political crisis they have there in the United States and elsewhere. So what we expect, and what I think we will see, is sharing the future and sharing the burden, sharing the responsibilities, and a more active role of China, for example, also in the Middle East. We in Turkey right now, we lead what we call a patriotic war. We have the United States arming different groups, different terror groups right south of the border. They have been responsible for the war in Iraq, they are responsible for the war in Syria, and they are preparing for new wars around the region and inside Turkey as well. So Turkey right now is at the forefront of the military conflict that Asia has with the former superpower United States. You have here in China and South Chinese Sea similar conflicts, and we are in the forefront. And here we expect that the whole Asian continent supports us and supports all the countries of the Middle East, of West Asia actually. Middle East is still the English term. West Asia, I'm very happy to use that term here, in maintaining our national unity and our territorial integrity. And I think China and India and Russia should play a more active role in that. And there is a local alliance already arising between Turkey, Russia and Iran, and I think China would be very, very welcomed in that, especially given the fact that the United States have used before some Islamic groups, Muslim groups to terrorize China as well.
However, China has kept some kind of a distance, I think, from joining any alliance of countries in resolving the Syria issue for understandable reasons, and which is also in line with China's foreign policy, that is not to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. But one thing I would like to talk maybe a little bit more about the mechanism of dialogues between parties is not binding. I mean, you know, it's just why is that important?
It's key to what you just said, that it's not about particular alliances with any one party or interference in internal government processes of another country. China has been very firm on this position. It has been a position that has been consistent through several political administrations, and now she is articulating it very strongly with his vision of a community of common destiny for mankind. China is not going to interfere in the internal processes of other countries, and this view is very different from Donald Trump, who is saying America first. But if we look at the way our planet is functioning, yes, we are in a new planetary era. The interconnectivity of all countries is so complex that what happens in one part of the world affects the other immediately, and therefore you have to be thinking globally. And of course each country has its own interest, but that interest is very much dependent upon the interests of other countries. Absolutely. And I think that's what's happening with this party-to-party dialogue of multiple parties and multiple integration of a community of common destiny for mankind. That's what's happening in this town. Okay, we have to leave it there, running out of time. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming to the show. And